Hi, this is Tom for PokerVIP.com and welcome to a pot limit Omaha video here at Winner. So this is a site that I haven't played on before. I have played on Betfair and it's the same network. The glide amongst you will see the software is very similar, if not completely identical. So there's a bit of familiarity there. And I can probably say with a good deal of confidence that this is one of the wildest Omaha lineups I think I've ever played in. So many random calls, overcalls, or three bets. The players per flop is sort of through the charts. So hopefully we can find some decent value spots and exploit that incredibly wild tendency that most players have. I think with the exception of Tricky Sticky on both tables and seems to be playing reasonably well. Everyone else just seems to be playing extremely random, aggressive Omaha. So the players per flop, etc., is going very high. If we were playing this like off camera, I would be using a HUD. You can use Poker Tracker, you can use Hold'em Manager. But for the purpose of video, I think it kind of clutters things up. I'd have to explain what exactly is going on with the HUD. So for pure aesthetics, I'm not using it. Left-hand table, we're going to be defending this multi-way, looking to flop reasonably well. Flop two pair of backdoor flush draw gut shot, which can start off with a check. The hand is strong, but it's not so strong that I want to play for stacks. Although in a lineup such as this, it does increase in strength. However, even in a lineup as wild as this, when it goes bet raise, we are just going to be folding. There's going to be a number of two-pair combos, some enormous combo draws, hands like 10-8-7 with spades, sets. We're ahead of pretty much nothing. So there is an auto buy-in option, which I have tagged, but for whatever reason I can't get the thing to work. So apologies while I top up. I'm sure there is a way to get it working. Much like any site, when you first start out, there's always a few little gremlins and glitches that you just aren't 100% familiar with the software. So yeah, hopefully I can figure it out eventually. But in the meantime, I'm just going to have to hit that top up button every once in a while. But as I was saying, the game seems to be extremely wild. You can see on the right-hand table, it's got limped and it's going 5 away. I mean, I'm the only one to fold, and frankly, there's a reason I folded it. Again, limping. Again, my hand's not super nutted. It's going to be a spot where we're just looking to play in position. We're looking to isolate. I've already had a few instances where I've 3-bet a perfectly legitimate hand and managed to get like 3 or 4 calls. Just something that doesn't typically happen in just about any game. So something I'm going to have to adjust to. And it's for sure exploitable, but it does also mean that there's basically no fold equity in the game, or close to none, based on what I've seen. I mean, I've seen somebody stack off with, like, I think it was middle pair for 100 big blinds in a 3-bet spot, which, yeah, I mean, it's a thing. Again, this is super random to just get min bet, click raise, click raise. Theoretically, my hand doesn't actually play super well versus click raises. That being said, I have a feeling this is somewhat random, so I'm going to overcall, and I guess if it gets back 4-bet, we're just going to fold, but that would kind of be it. Given over backdoor flush draw, top 2 and a gut shot, I'm just going to lead out here. I can't really trust other people to bet based on what I've seen. We're going to size up and look to play for stacks on turn. If someone happens to have flopped a set, then congratulations, you have 100 big blinds to your name. Given how wild these games are playing, I can't imagine a scenario in which I would ever be folding here. And we're just going to be getting in on turn. Left-hand table, totally legitimate open. Stacks off with aces. What he is doing, click raising that, I would never know, but whatevs. Open our aces. Actually got 3-bet. We are going to jam. I'm not 100% that they're going to fold and allow this spot to go heads up, but getting it in with aces pre is obviously about as standard as it comes. Right-hand table, unfortunately, this is going to be a board that connects with our opponent's range pretty well, so I'm just going to check back. I do actually get some respect for that 4-bet, which is surprising. Turning second nizzles with flush redraw. Ooh, I won aces versus aces. Nice. There's two ways to play the right-hand table. I can either check and look to bluff catch, given my opponent doesn't have many spade draws, having check flop, or we can block a bet. Both have merits. I'm going to go for the check call approach, I think. Ends up going check check, which is not the world's worst outcome, truthfully. But given the check check nature on flop, my opponent isn't going to show up with many spade draws. The ones he is going to have are very weak. Although I have seen some incredibly weak flush draws played very, very strongly in this game. And once the turn comes off, completing our straight, it's the effective nuts. Our opponent can have some heart draws that are weaker that are now chasing, having turned equity. We're very much incentivized to let that kind of hand sort of fire off repping spades that it really shouldn't have. So it's not a spot I'm ever really going to be check folding. You know, barring a huge amount of history on a player. You know, if I'm playing the world's greatest nip, then obviously it would be somewhat different. But from what I've seen in like half an hour of action here at Winner, I don't believe that player exists. If they do, they're very well disguised. So, yeah, pretty standard check call, I think, on river. But blocker betting a third to half pot also has some merit. It really depends on what you think your opponent's bluffing tendency is going to be there. Fives and fours would be pretty legitimate as a button open cutoff. A little too light when opened in front from what I would probably consider to be the only player playing somewhat close to reasonable pre-flop hand selection. Is just going to be a fold. Tricky Sticky does seem to be playing reasonably close to what you would consider to be standard in terms of opening, raising ranges, 3-bet ranges, calling ranges. Just from like even seeing him just for half an hour, most things seem reasonably solid as far as I can tell. I big him up and he stacks up with a set. I guess, to be honest, in a game like this, though, like a hand like middle set just shoots up in value. So, yeah, there could very easily be some history there that I'm unaware of that leads him to believe that his set is good, especially when he has 2 queen blockers. So, without the nut flush, I'm just going to be folding there. Again, in this lineup, maybe that's questionable. In a standard lineup, it's not, especially. With the nut flush, we'd obviously be ISO raising, trying to get the hand heads up, etc. If we're in a later position, it's a very, very enticing spot to ISO raise. But given this format that seems to be pots going 400, 500 regularly, you know, suited and double suited hands are really going to want them to be nutted or second nutted to you know, essentially prevent myself from getting coolered flush over flush and to be on the right side of cooler, because if I happen to be on the right side of a flush versus flush scenario, or a set versus set, straight versus straight, whatever cooler it happens to be, in this particular format, I really would be surprised to see anyone folding. So, yeah, we're sort of looking for any suited or double suited hands to be nut flushy, you know, barring the double suited connected rundowns, that kind of stuff, which we still need to be cautious of, you know, if we happen to make third nut flush, fourth nut flush, that kind of stuff. The one thing that I will say about these games is, although a lot of people have been stacked, a lot of money's flying around, a lot of people seem to be rebuying, so it does mean there's some quite deep stacks, which, you know, can certainly add to some interest later in the piece. Right-hand table, barring some really weird pre-flop action, this seems like a pretty legit defend, sometimes 3-bet, depending on what is going on. I mean, I guess we're just going to ISO raise, try and alter SPR with a very strong hand. Queen with double gut shot is reasonable. Bet pickup's absolutely fine. I mean, even versus a check raise, given I have an open ender in my hand, like, I mean, I have to assume that my opponent's only check raising king 10 or 10-8 to be really significantly worried. which again, given the hands I've seen being shown down, I can't say is very likely. This would certainly be a bit of a big blind defend, as I struggle with the English language once again in one of these videos. Small blind, you go either way on it, but I think folding's fine. The fact we have 3 clubs kind of hurts the hand. I don't really want to be out of position in scenarios where people are playing very wild. It's going to make my life significantly more difficult. As exploitative as that line is, and I'm sure, you know, if I were playing people that were thinking on a theoretical basis and adjusting very quickly and very rapidly, then yes, it would be exploitable and people would be, you know, extracting quite a few big blinds per 100 taking that line. But I'm going to assume that my opponents are not doing that for what I've seen. So I don't think playing an exploitative strategy in these games is going to be a mistake. I actually think it's probably going to be more profitable than approaching things from a purely theoretical basis. Just going to overlimp here. ISOing's fine as well, but take a flop and see what happens. I do have the button, which, again, in multi-way spots, it's going to be fairly beneficial for me. We have a 3-figure stack on the left-hand table. I have a gut shot on the backdoor flush draw. It's a weak one. I don't really think I want to bluff into 4 people. Doesn't seem like a recipe for success. I think in even my most... Ooh, nice. I think even in my most maniacal moment, I would consider that to be fairly suicidal. Not exactly sure why you would ever choose to raise having checked flop, but I don't know. You can turn 10-8, you can turn 3-8s. Given how wide people are playing, limping, etc., the ranges are going to be somewhat random, so random turn sets, etc., that you wouldn't expect people to have under the gun or under the gun +1 are suddenly going to exist, and you have to adjust to that. It's unusual, certainly not anything you see in a tougher format, but you know, something that's for sure possible and that we should be adjusting to and considering as possible when we're trying to construct what an opponent's range is going to be in our mind. Although, given the random nature of that, that is going to be somewhat difficult, and there is, to a certain extent, we are playing the strength of our hand versus, you know, how much value we think we can extract. There are still going to be range versus range considerations, but when range is so much wider, it is more difficult to sort of determine how well you're doing versus opponent's range. So Gazmax has bought in for €8 and has not reloaded, which is extremely unusual, but given the fact they're limping every pot, it's actually going to make it quite awkward for us. So I'm kind of hoping they either get stacked or doubled up. Either way, it's going to make my life significantly easier. If they continue to sort of bleed down and have 20 big blind, 15 big blind stacks, it just makes my life incredibly difficult, purely because if I'm ISO raising, it's just going to mean there's more dead money in the pot. There's going to be more people overcalling. And no matter what my hand is, it's just going to make life more difficult playing it multi-way. Limping random 8s. Again, I'm sure this happens on other sites to a degree, but I haven't seen it happen to this extent. Although the kind of raise 3-bet clicks, massive stack offs, I haven't seen so much on the right-hand table. Maybe it's calmed down a bit. Maybe when I sat down, it was at its most volatile, perhaps. There is a natural ebb and flow to a cash game. Get check raise on the left-hand table. Chop it up. That's a pretty nice free roll that Paderborn had there. Don't really seem to be getting a great deal on the left-hand table since we got aces and won against the other aces, which, you know, is always nice. But since then, we've basically had just trash, and trash in not very good positions as well. Not a Whale at one point did have about 85 euros, so the fact they've got stacked um, pretty much back to their starting stack is going to indicate just how, one, how wild they play, and two, how swingy these games can be. Right-hand table, don't normally like calling spots like this, but I really don't imagine Clef to Go is going to back raise. I do have enough flush. It's somewhat connected, so let's see some clubs dealer. I mean, if they're limp folding, that's questionable in the extreme. Given how deep we are versus Tricky Sticky, there's very limited reason to check raise. Check calling keeps his range somewhat wide. There are also going to be instances where he has pretty enormous range advantage. That being said, when Gazmax overcalls, this does complicate things. My plan here, I think, is to raise and fold if Tricky jams on me. I think if Tricky jams on me, is basically repping sets, and that's just about it. Occasionally he's going to base jack with a flush draw, ace jack with straight draws. Uh, 4-3 gets there, but that really shouldn't be in range. We are just going to shove here. Would not be heartbroken to see a fold. Win the side pot, lose the main one to a questionable play from Gazmax. I did say I wanted them to either double up or lose. I was preferring they did not double up through me. But maybe lost a couple of euros there. It's nothing major. Nothing too tragic. Once Tricky calls flop, his range is largely going to be an ace with a flush draw, occasionally ace jack that we took him off the chop, and hands like king queen 10, queen 10 with a flush draw, something like king queen jack 10 for a pair with a wrap. Hands like that that are basically looking to improve on turn or give up. The fact he very, 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 very occasionally he's called aces, to trap, but one, that's unlikely given I have an ace in hand, and secondly, generally speaking, when people have sets, they're just keen to get the money in versus check raises rather than complicate things. Potentially let a scare card come off, etc. I wouldn't love the jam, and indeed I was going to fold to it. On the button on the left-hand table, there's not much incentive to 3-bet. The hand is reasonable, but it's not crazy, crazy strong. Calling's absolutely fine. Just play some post-flop poker. It's not exactly a stunning flop. I have a gut shot, a non-nut gut shot of that. We have backdoor straight draws to the queen 10. It did get checked round, but again, bluffing 3 people, 2 of whom are, let's call them aggressive. Seems ambitious. Turn a double gut shot. Opponent's ranges are reasonably capped now. Certainly can rep hands like 9-8. Still have to worry about what I do on rivers. That being said, we are just going to take a shot here and attempt to get it through. We can occasionally just get folds round. If we get check raised, it's incredibly random, but almost certainly nutted. Given how wide our opponent calls, this is somewhat of an issue. I am going to have more full houses than my opponent, but I really question whether he folds flushes. That being said, do flushes ever check? Probably not. If he has a flush, it's a particularly weak one. That raise makes basically no sense. That being said, given everything I've seen about them, I can't imagine they're folding anything, frankly. It's extremely random. They literally have no full houses in their range whatsoever. But it's an adjustment I have to make if I think my opponent is completely incapable of folding anything, which, based on what I've seen, is an assumption I'm going to make, that my opponent has been calling off with 5 high flushes. Been calling off with 2 pairs on flush boards. So he's not the kind of person that I can basically use range advantage against and just jam him off a hand. He's just going to snap call with his weak hand, and I'm going to look like an idiot. And it's going to cost me a good chunk of money. So as much as theoretically I can probably rep a stronger range and against a semi-competent player take them off a hand, against somebody who I don't think has a working fold button, that's just not going to work. And the fact he's calling off with 1 card to come with this kind of hand, granted, not a whale is extremely loose, but it is kind of illustrating my point that trying to get a hand through versus him once he check raises is just spewing money away. There's an argument against a player such as that perhaps I should have just given up on river. It's something with a bit more history I would consider. I did feel like I had range advantage. Perhaps I was thinking about the hand from too theoretical point of view rather than from a purely pragmatic approach, going on player tendency rather than theory. When my opponent's checking flop and check calling turn, he is repping a very, very capped and weak range. But if he's playing a hand like that, I guess just have to make the adjustment. Very disappointing flop on the right hand table. Just gonna be checking bottom pair back. Do turn 2 pair now, which has some value. Just gonna take it for showdown. I don't really need to turn this hand into a bluff, and I don't actually think there's any value. Opponent suddenly pots, which is random, frankly. Would have expected most flushes to bet turn. I mean, once in a while he's going to show with a flush. Figure he's just attempting to take me off a cat ranger. Apparently you do check the nuts twice. That's bizarre. Oh well. Guess I could go back to the assumption that pot bets are usually nutted, but I do see a good chunk of bluffs there as well. So I have to be right 1 in 3 times, and I think I probably am. I said checking a flush twice. Like checking flop makes all the sense in the world. Checking turn is questionable, to be honest. If you're looking to flop a flush, or indeed make a hand like that, you're trying to extract value from it, and checking turn is just going to take a street of value away from you. So do question what he was hoping to achieve with that check, but ended up working out for him, albeit as a bit of a random play. I have a feeling over the course of these 2 videos, that's not the first time I'm going to say something's a bit of a random play. Opening button on left-hand table, pretty reasonable. Given I have the ace of spade blocker, I am going to be continuing here. Bit of a combo bet as value / bluff, somewhat more weighted towards bluff, but given how wide this guy's playing, could make an argument there's value there. Gonna check back, end up making a straight. He's gonna have some king queens in his range. Not exactly a fad of the pot size. That being said, I'm probably too strong in my range to consider folding. Chasing the gut shot on the flop makes all the sense in the world. Perhaps adjustments to be made versus pot size bets on this site. Why he's called flop on a gut shot, I'm sure he has his reasons. Yeah. I have so many aces there, I have so many nut flush draws. You have 4 outs, theoretically you can have 3 a good chunk of the time as well. And you're out of position. So some pretty compelling reasons not to do what he just did. Again, somewhat random play worked out for him, but it is what it is. We're still up, so you know, whatever. But I do question what he's been smoking to do that. Let's take a flop on the right-hand table. Disappointing would be one way to phrase that. I have a gut shot to the 6. It's not nutted. I have no backdoor flush draw. Somewhat weak jacks. Again, limp under the gun. Again, questionable, especially given stack size. But it's something that seems to be happening quite regularly. So seems to be a pretty standard facet of the game, or at least of these games. Certainly not of the game in general. That would be ridiculous to say. Tricky Sticky does seem to be ISO raising a good chunk of the time, which is exactly what he should be doing in those kind of games. We're not going to be overcalling this in the small blind. Hypothetically, in the big blind, it makes a little bit more sense. But when we're going to be out of position to 4 people with a middle strength hand, you know, it's a bit mediocre, then it's not an especially good spot to put ourselves in. We can fold for half a blind, which, given the potential scenarios we can find ourselves in, is going to be something I'm reasonably content with. Rubbish 8s into the muck. Again, limped. Again, rubbish hand. The hands we'd be completing small blind in the limp spot, but again, we're on the button. We haven't invested anything. There's no real pressing reason to do anything but hit the fold button. As somewhat frustrating it is not to be able to find value spots in these games in the last 10 minutes or so. Reasonably good hand in the left-hand table in the big blind. It's connected. Do have one suit. Is going to be a defend. A reasonably happy defend. There's no real value in 3-betting. Flop in the 8-7 draw with a backdoor hearts. Pretty reasonable candidate for a check call. Actually turned a double gut shot. I'm actually going to be folding 3 aces just given the number of people taking this hand to the pot. If I thought I could get this hand heads up, I would be, but I actually don't think we will. I'm just going to be overpeeling here. Do have to occasionally worry about the presence of spades, but given the price it's offering us, this is absolutely fine. Not a whale is taking his time. Do have an 8 blocker in my hand. Opponent has somewhat of a cap range. I'm going to have more straights than my opponent. Well, I'm going to attempt to buy this pot. Looking to fold out ace X, random king X's. Yeah, get it through. It's all good. Once he checks turn, he's capping range, and I really don't expect many people here to be having like balanced check calling ranges on any street, much less river. You know, I think a check here basically just is effectively a white flag. I really don't think it's an instance where there's going to be many spots where a check means anything but, with the one notable exception of this player making a check raise in an incredibly random scenario a little while back. But I would say that that's probably an anomaly versus the standard reaction to a check. So we are going to play one more hand and then wrap this video up. It's been somewhat random. I mean, given the nature of these games, it's quite difficult to sort of play what you consider to be like a theoretical, perfectly balanced strategy. It's far more just finding spots, seeing random action and adjusting to it, and being capable of adjusting at a greater pace than your opponents. The games, for what they're worth, like do seem to be pretty soft. So I think with a sufficiently large bankroll, there is a good chunk of money to be made here. That being said, I do think you need to be playing with a pretty large bankroll or number of buy-ins for the stake that you play, just based on the sheer variance that seems to be going on in these games, just because there's so many people per pot. There's so many, effectively just bloated pots that's going to, result in reasonably large swings to your bankroll one way or the other. So I think as long as you're content with that, then you can probably make some decent money here. We're just going to be folding here. So that is going to wrap the video up. I've been Tom from PokerVIP.com, and hopefully I will see you for part 2.